She escaped slavery, then became the South's most feared liberator, 1843. The sun hadn't fully risen over the Georgia plantation when they dragged Marcus to the whipping post. His wrists were already bleeding from the iron shackles, but that pain was nothing compared to what was coming. The overseer, a man named Caleb Thorne, stood with a whip coiled in his hand like a sleeping serpent. Around them, enslaved men, women, and children were forced to watch, their faces masks of controlled terror. This wasn't just punishment. This was a message. Marcus had been caught with a piece of paper, just a scrap with a few words scrawled on it. Reading. Writing. Both were forbidden, both were death sentences in slow motion. But Marcus hadn't been learning for himself. He'd been teaching others in secret, in the dead of night, in a hidden corner of the tobacco barn where the smell of drying leaves masked the whispers of hope. Someone had betrayed him. Thorne stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. "You thought you were clever," he said, his voice low and venomous. "Thought you could fill their heads with ideas above their station. Now you'll pay for every letter you wrote." The first lash split the morning silence. The silent witness welcome to the dusty chronicle. Step into the shadows of America's darkest past. Before we begin, drop a comment below, tell us which city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Let's see how far this story reaches across the world. Now, brace yourself. What you're about to witness isn't fiction. It's the kind of history they tried to bury. Subscribe for more historical stories, like and comment to share your thoughts, and hit the bell icon for frontier and slavery-era story updates. Dive into history, explore the struggles and triumphs of the past, and uncover the untold stories that defined a turbulent era. Among the forced witnesses stood a young woman named Sarah. She was barely 18, her hands calloused from years of field work, her eyes holding a fire that no amount of oppression had managed to extinguish. She watched Marcus's back split open, watched the blood run down his spine, and felt something inside her crystallize into pure, cold rage. Sarah had been the one Marcus taught first. She could read now, could write her own name and the names of her children who'd been sold away years ago. She'd memorized every word he'd given her, treasured them like jewels. And she knew, with absolute certainty, who had betrayed him. Isaiah. The house servant who moved between the master's world and theirs, who smiled and nodded and pretended to be one of them while reporting every whisper, every plan, every desperate hope to the men who held the whips. Thorne delivered the 20th lash. Marcus's screams had stopped 5 strokes ago. He hung from the post, barely conscious, his body a testament to cruelty. The overseer finally stepped back, breathing hard from the exertion, and addressed the crowd. "Let this be a lesson," he announced. "There is no freedom in knowledge. There is only obedience. Now get to work." As the crowd dispersed, Sarah caught Isaiah's eye. He looked away quickly, but not before she saw the flash of guilt, the momentary crack in his careful mask. She filed that weakness away. It would be useful. The underground current. 3 days passed. Marcus survived, though he couldn't work. He lay in the slave quarters, tended by the old women who knew which herbs stopped infection, which prayers might keep death at bay. Sarah visited him when she could, bringing water, changing his bandages, whispering words of comfort and promises of revenge. "Don't," Marcus managed, his voice barely audible. "Don't throw your life away for me." "This isn't about you," Sarah replied, her tone harder than the iron shackles they wore. "This is about all of us. About every child sold, every back scarred, every name forgotten." Isaiah chose his side. Now he'll learn what that choice costs. But Sarah wasn't acting alone. In the weeks following Marcus's punishment, she'd connected with others, field workers who'd lost family, house servants who'd witnessed unspeakable cruelties, even a blacksmith named Thomas who had access to tools that could become weapons. They met in whispers, in shadows, planning not just revenge but something bigger. Escape. The plantation sat near the Savannah River, and beyond that river lay Cherokee territory, then the vast wilderness of the Appalachian foothills. Runaways had made it before, though most were caught and returned to fates worse than death. But some, a precious few, had vanished into those mountains and never been found. Stories circulated of free black settlements hidden in the ridges, of communities that had built lives beyond the reach of slave catchers. Sarah intended to find them. But first, she had to deal with Isaiah. The trap springs. It was Thomas who came up with the plan. As the plantation's blacksmith, he had freedom of movement other enslaved people didn't. He could travel to neighboring plantations to repair tools, could interact with overseers and even the master himself without immediate suspicion. And he'd learned, through careful observation and patient listening, exactly when and where Isaiah reported to Thorn. Every Sunday night, after the master's family retired, Isaiah would slip out of the main house and meet Thorn in the tobacco barn, the same barn where Marcus had held his secret school. There, Isaiah would exchange information for small privileges, extra food, occasional coins, promises of preferential treatment. Sarah, Thomas, and 3 others, men named Jacob, Daniel, and Solomon, waited in the barn's loft on a moonless Sunday night. Below, they heard footsteps, then voices. The woman, Sarah, Isaiah was saying. She's been meeting with others. Planning something. I haven't learned what yet, but... You'll find out, Thorn interrupted. And when you do, you'll tell me immediately. Understand? Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Sarah's hand tightened around the wooden club Thomas had fashioned. Below, Isaiah was still talking, still selling his people for scraps. She looked at Thomas, who nodded once. Then she dropped from the loft. She landed behind Isaiah, who spun with a startled cry. Thorn reached for the pistol at his belt, but Jacob and Daniel were already on him, their combined weight driving him to the ground. Solomon grabbed the pistol, his hands shaking but his grip firm. Isaiah backed against the barn wall, his eyes wide with terror. Sarah, please, I had no choice. They would have killed me, they would have. You always had a choice, Sarah said quietly. You chose wrong. The club came down once, hard, against Isaiah's temple. He crumpled without another sound. The flight begins. They had minutes, maybe less, before someone noticed the commotion. Thomas moved quickly, binding Thorn with the same chains used on enslaved people, gagging him with a piece of burlap sack. The overseer's eyes blazed with fury and fear, but he couldn't scream, couldn't call for help. We leave now, Sarah said. Everyone we planned for. Everyone who's ready. Thomas nodded. The river crossing is a mile east. We have a raft hidden in the reeds. It'll hold 8, maybe 10 if we're careful. And if we're caught. Then we were dead anyway. They moved through the quarters, waking the chosen few, people who'd been carefully vetted, who'd proven their commitment and their silence. 15 in total, men, women, and 3 children young enough to carry but old enough not to cry. Each person grabbed what little they owned and followed Sarah and Thomas into the darkness. Behind them, in the tobacco barn, Thorn struggled against his bonds. Isaiah lay unconscious, blood pooling beneath his head. And in the main house, the master slept, unaware that his property was disappearing into the night. The group moved in silence, using hand signals Thomas had taught them, following the North Star and the moss on the trees. The river appeared before them, a dark ribbon cutting through the landscape, and there, hidden exactly where Thomas said it would be, was the raft. Women and children first, Sarah ordered. Quiet. No talking until we reach the other side. They began loading the raft. The current was stronger than expected, the water cold enough to steal breath. Sarah helped the last child aboard, then turned to wave the men forward. That's when she heard it. Dogs. The baying of bloodhounds, still distant but getting closer. Someone had discovered their absence. Someone had raised the alarm. "Row!" Sarah hissed. "Row now!" The raft pushed off from the shore, oars biting into the dark water. Behind them, torches appeared through the trees, flickering like angry fireflies. Shouts echoed across the plantation grounds. Sarah stood on the bank with Thomas and the remaining men, watching the raft disappear into the darkness. They'd need a second trip. But the dogs were getting closer, and time was something they no longer had. "We run," Thomas said. "We split up, lead them away from the river, give the others time." Sarah looked at the water, at the far shore where freedom waited. Then she looked at Thomas, at Jacob, at Daniel and Solomon. At the men who'd chosen to stay behind, to sacrifice themselves so others might live. "Together," she said. "We run together." They turned and plunged into the forest, not toward the river but away from it, their footsteps deliberately loud, their path deliberately obvious. Behind them, the torches shifted direction, the dogs picked up their scent, and the hunt began in earnest. Sarah's heart pounded as branches whipped her face, as roots tried to trip her feet. She could hear Thomas breathing hard beside her, could hear the dogs getting closer, closer, impossibly close. Then the forest opened up, and they stood at the edge of a ravine, a drop of at least 30 feet into darkness below. The dogs burst from the trees behind them. Sarah looked at Thomas. He looked back, and in his eyes, she saw the same desperate calculation she was making. Jump and possibly die, or stay and definitely face capture and torture. "On three," Thomas said. Behind them, men on horseback appeared, rifles raised. Thorne was with them, freed somehow, his face twisted with murderous rage. 1. The dogs lunged forward, teeth bared. 2. Rifles cracked, bullets whining past their heads. 3. They jumped. The river of no return. The fall and the finding. Sarah hit the water hard, the impact driving all air from her lungs. The ravine had concealed a tributary of the savannah, swollen from recent rains and moving fast enough to disorient and drown. She tumbled beneath the surface, her lungs screaming, her hands grasping for anything solid. Then Thomas's hand found hers, pulling her up, and she broke the surface gasping. The current swept them downstream, away from the torches and rifles, away from the plantation they'd called prison for their entire lives. Behind them, she could hear frustrated shouts, but the darkness and the water had swallowed them whole. "Don't fight it," Thomas managed between breaths. "Let the river take us. Save your strength." They floated for what felt like hours but was probably minutes, the cold seeping into their bones, their clothes dragging like anchors. Finally, the current slowed, and Thomas guided them toward a muddy bank overhung with willow branches. They crawled onto solid ground, shaking and exhausted, but alive. "The others?" Sarah asked. Thomas shook his head. "Scattered. Jacob went left before we jumped. Daniel and Solomon, I don't know. Maybe they found another way down. Or maybe they're dead. Or captured." The words hung between them, heavy as the chains they'd fled. Captured meant torture for information, then execution as an example. Death would be the merciful option. Sarah stood on trembling legs, surveying their surroundings. They'd traveled at least 2 miles downriver, well beyond the plantation boundaries. Forest pressed close on all sides, thick and ancient and offering both shelter and threat. "We need to keep moving," she said. "Dawn's coming, and when it does, they'll have trackers on us. Real hunters, not just overseers with dogs." Thomas nodded, pushing himself upright. That's when Sarah saw the blood. #the hidden cost. A rifle ball had clipped Thomas's side during their escape, tearing through flesh just above his hip. He'd said nothing, done nothing to slow their flight, but now the wound was bleeding freely, soaking his already wet shirt with fresh crimson. "Thomas. I'm fine," he said, though his face had gone gray. "Just a graze. That's not a graze. We need to stop the bleeding. We need to move. You'll bleed out before noon if we don't. Then I bleed out. His voice turned hard. Sarah, those children on that raft, those families, they're still close enough to catch. Every minute we waste here is a minute the hunters get closer to them. We move. We lead the pursuit away. That's the only plan that matters. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to force him to stop and rest and let her bind the wound properly. But she knew he was right. The raft hadn't been designed for speed, and the river's current, while helpful, wouldn't carry them to safety before sunrise. Thorn would have men on the far bank by now, searching, waiting. 20 minutes, she compromised. Give me 20 minutes to pack the wound. Then we run. She tore strips from her already tattered dress, wadding them against the injury. Thomas bit down on a piece of leather to keep from crying out as she worked. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good, no fragments to fester. But the damage was significant, and infection was almost certain without proper medicine. There's a settlement, Thomas said through gritted teeth. 3 days north. Free blacks and Cherokee who've intermarried. They trade with runaways sometimes, help them get further north. If we can reach them. 3 days. You can't walk 3 days with that wound. I can't stay here and die either. He pushed to his feet, wavering slightly but staying upright through sheer will. Sarah steadied him, and together they began walking north, using the stars to guide them, listening for any sound of pursuit. The forest was alive with night sounds, owls hunting, possums rustling through underbrush, the distant scream of a wildcat. But beneath those natural rhythms, Sarah's ears strained for human noise, the crunch of boots, the jingle of bridles, the excited yelping of tracking dogs. Nothing yet. But dawn was coming, and with it, the hunters. The tracker's art. Silas Crenshaw had tracked runaways for 20 years. He knew their patterns, their desperate logic, the way fear made people predictable. When Thorn hired him that morning, offering double his usual fee plus a bonus for each slave returned alive, Silas had smiled his thin, cold smile and set to work. He found their trail within an hour, the scuff marks where they'd climbed from the river, the blood drops from the wounded man, the pattern of their footsteps that told him they were exhausted, injured, and heading north. North meant freedom to runaways. North meant the settlements, the underground railroad, the myth of sanctuary. Silas didn't believe in sanctuary. He believed in money, efficiency, and the certainty that every runaway eventually made a mistake. He traveled light, 2 dogs trained not to kill but to corner, a rifle, a coil of rope, and manacles that had worn grooves in hundreds of wrists over the years. Behind him, Thorn rode with 6 armed men, but Silas preferred to work alone. Groups made noise, disturbed the trail, ruined the hunt's purity. By midday, he'd closed the distance to less than 3 miles. The blood trail was getting fresher, the footprints deeper as exhaustion set in. Another few hours, and he'd have them. Silas paused at a stream where they'd stopped to drink, noting the way the mud had been disturbed, the droplets of blood on the rocks. The wounded one was slowing them down. Smart runaways would have abandoned him by now, but these 2 were still together. Loyalty or stupidity? Silas didn't care. It made them easier to catch. He signaled his dogs forward, letting them pick up the scent, and continued north. The moral choice. Sarah heard the dogs before she saw them. That distinctive baying that meant bloodhounds, trained killers disguised as hunting animals. She and Thomas had been walking for 6 hours, and his pace had slowed to a painful shuffle. The wound was worse than she'd thought, or infection had already set in. Either way, he wouldn't outrun a determined tracker. "Leave me," Thomas said. His voice was weak, Freddy. "Hide my trail and go. You can still make it." "No. Sarah, listen to reason. One of us can survive this. That's better than none. I didn't escape slavery to abandon the first free choice I ever made. We go together or not at all. They'd reached a clearing where a massive oak had fallen years ago, creating a natural shelter beneath its trunk. Sarah helped Thomas into the hollow, then began disguising their entry point, scattering leaves and branches to hide the disturbed earth. The dogs were getting closer. She had perhaps 10 minutes before they arrived. 10 minutes to prepare, to plan, to decide whether she was willing to kill to remain free. In her hand, she held a rock, smooth and heavy, perfect for throwing or bludgeoning. It was the only weapon she had. Sarah had never killed anyone. Never even seriously hurt anyone. Violence was the master's tool, the overseer's language. She'd sworn to herself that she wouldn't become what they were, wouldn't let cruelty poison her soul. But freedom demanded prices she hadn't imagined while planning the escape in whispered conferences and midnight meetings. The first dog burst into the clearing. Sarah threw the rock. It caught the animal mid-leap, striking its skull with a crack that echoed through the forest. The dog dropped, whimpering, not dead but definitely stunned. The second dog skidded to a halt, growling, uncertain. Then Silas Crenshaw stepped into the clearing. He was older than Sarah expected, maybe 50, with gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. He held his rifle casually, not quite aimed at her but ready to be in an instant. "You've got spirit," he said conversationally, as if they were meeting at a church social instead of a manhunt. "I appreciate that. Most just run until they collapse. You actually tried to defend yourself." Sarah said nothing, her mind racing through possibilities. Run and get shot. Fight and get shot. Surrender and get dragged back to a fate worse than death. "Where's the man?" Silas asked, though his eyes had already found the hollow beneath the fallen oak. "Wounded, I'm guessing, from the blood trail." "He alive?" "That's none of your concern." Silas smiled. "Everything about you is my concern, girl. You're property, and property doesn't get opinions. Now, you can make this easy." Sarah lunged. She knew it was futile even as she moved, knew that a 50-year-old tracker was still faster and stronger than an exhausted, starving 18-year-old woman. But she'd made her choice. She would rather die fighting than live in chains. Silas sidestepped her rush with practiced ease, bringing the rifle but around in a swing that caught her in the ribs. Pain exploded through her chest, driving her to her knees. She tried to rise, to fight, to do anything, but her body had finally reached its limit. The tracker loomed over her, rifle now properly aimed at her head. "Like I said," he murmured. "I appreciate the spirit. But appreciation doesn't pay bills." He pulled the trigger. The click of an empty chamber was the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. Silas frowned, breaking open the rifle to check the ammunition. That moment of distraction was all Thomas needed. He emerged from the hollow, moving with the last dregs of his strength, and drove his shoulder into Silas's midsection. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs. Sarah forced herself up, ignoring the screaming pain in her ribs, and grabbed the rifle. By the time she had it properly oriented, Thomas and Silas were locked in desperate struggle, neither willing to yield, both fighting with the fury of men who knew this was their last battle. "Move!" Sarah shouted. Thomas rolled away, and Sarah brought the rifle down like a club across Silas's skull. The tracker went limp. For a long moment, neither Sarah nor Thomas moved, both too exhausted and hurting to process what had just happened. Then Thomas coughed, and blood appeared on his lips. Not good, definitely not good, and Sarah knew they had to keep moving. She searched Silas's body, finding a knife, some jerky, and a compass. The dogs had fled when their master fell, which bought them time but not much. Thorne and his men would be close behind. "Can you walk?" she asked Thomas. He nodded, though they both knew it was a lie. But lies were all they had left, so Sarah helped him up, and together they staggered north, leaving the unconscious tracker and his fate behind them. The settlement of ghosts. The last mile. Thomas collapsed a half-mile from the settlement. One moment he was walking, shuffling, really, each step an act of pure willpower, and the next he was on the ground, his breathing shallow and rapid, his skin burning with fever. Sarah knelt beside him, her own body trembling with exhaustion and despair. They'd come so far, survived so much, and now, with sanctuary literally within sight, he was dying. "Go," Thomas whispered. "Please. Just, go. I'm not leaving you. Then we both die. Is that what you want? After everything?" "What I want," Sarah said fiercely, "is for you to shut up and save your strength." She stood, scanning their surroundings. The forest had thinned here, giving way to rocky terrain that offered better visibility but less cover. In the distance, she could see smoke rising, the settlement Thomas had mentioned, the community of free blacks and Cherokee who supposedly helped runaways. If she left him and went for help, Thomas might die before she returned. But if she stayed, they'd both be caught when Silas woke up and brought Thorne's men down on them. The choice was impossible, which meant there was no choice at all. Sarah grabbed Thomas beneath his arms and began dragging him forward. He tried to protest, but he didn't have the strength anymore. His eyes fluttered closed, and for a terrible moment, Sarah thought he'd died. Then his chest rose and fell, and she kept pulling. 50 yards. 100. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but rest meant death, so she ignored the pain and kept moving. The settlement grew closer, close enough now that she could see individual buildings, could hear the faint sounds of daily life drifting on the wind. She was almost there when the rifle shot rang out. The Guardian's test. The bullet kicked up dirt 3 feet to Sarah's left, a warning shot, deliberately meant to miss. She froze, still holding Thomas, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Let him go and step back," a voice commanded. Female, older, carrying the weight of authority. Slowly. Sarah obeyed, moving with exaggerated care. From the rocks ahead, a woman emerged, perhaps 60 years old, with iron-gray hair tied back severely and a hunting rifle held with the comfort of long familiarity. Behind her came others, men and women of various ages, some clearly of African descent, others Cherokee or mixed race, all armed and watchful. "Please," Sarah said. "We're runaways. We've come from the Thorne plantation, 3 days south. He's wounded, he needs help." "I know what you are," the woman interrupted. "And I know what's probably following you. The question is whether you're worth the risk of protecting." "Worth the..." Sarah's exhaustion briefly overcame her caution. "He's dying. People die every day. My concern is the living, the ones already here, who've built something worth defending. If I help you, I draw attention to this place. Attention brings hunters. Hunters bring militias. Militias bring destruction." The woman's eyes were hard but not cruel, calculating rather than cold. "So convince me. Why should I risk everything we've built for 2 strangers?" Sarah had no answer prepared for this, no argument rehearsed. All she had was truth and desperation. "Because if you don't," she said quietly, "then what you've built here means nothing. You've just made yourself a bigger, better prison. Freedom that refuses to help the still enslaved isn't freedom. It's just postponed slavery." The woman studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Good answer. Bring him. The price of sanctuary." The settlement was more substantial than Sarah had imagined. 20 buildings at least, solid construction rather than hastily thrown together shelters. Gardens showing careful tending, livestock in pens, children playing under watchful eyes. This wasn't a way station or temporary refuge. This was a community, built to last, defended and defended again by people who'd earned their freedom and refused to surrender it. They carried Thomas to what passed for an infirmary, a cabin stocked with herbs, clean bandages, and a stern Cherokee woman named Awinita who took one look at his wound and began barking orders in a mixture of English and Cherokee. Sarah tried to help, but hands gently but firmly guided her to a chair. "Rest," said the gray-haired woman who'd met them at gunpoint. Her name was Ruth, and she'd been free for 15 years, having escaped from a plantation in South Carolina with her 3 children. Now she ran this settlement with an iron will tempered by hard-won wisdom. "You've done what you could. Now let those with actual medical knowledge take over." "Will he live?" Ruth shrugged. "Awinita has saved people in worse condition. And lost people who seemed fine until they weren't. We'll know by morning." Morning. Sarah had lost track of time during the flight, but now, sitting in relative safety, she realized she'd been running for nearly 4 days straight. Her body was a catalogue of injuries, ribs probably cracked from Silas's rifle butt, feet bleeding inside her ruined shoes, hands torn from climbing and fighting and dragging Thomas through the forest. "You'll want to clean up," Ruth said, reading her expression. "Then eat. Then sleep. In that order. Tomorrow, we talk about what comes next." "What comes next is we keep moving north," Sarah said. "To Pennsylvania, Ohio, somewhere truly free. Maybe. Or maybe you stay here, help us build something stronger. We can always use capable people, and you've proven you're a survivor." "I didn't survive just to hide in the woods." "No." Ruth's eyebrow arched. "Then why did you survive? What are you running toward, girl, besides away?" The question stopped Sarah cold. She'd spent so long focused on escape, on the tactics and timing and desperate hope of freedom, that she hadn't thought beyond it. Freedom to do what? To be what? The future was a blank page, terrifying in its openness. Before she could answer, a commotion erupted outside. "The hunter arrives." Silas Crenshaw had been tracking runaways for 2 decades, and in all that time, only 3 had ever reached a settlement before he caught them. Sarah and Thomas were attempting to become the 4th, and Silas took that personally. He'd woken from Sarah's blow with a splitting headache and murderous fury. Rather than wait for Thorne's bumbling militia, he'd pushed ahead alone, trusting his skills and his dogs to close the distance. By nightfall, he'd found the settlement. Now he stood at its perimeter, hidden in the trees, counting numbers and assessing defenses. 30 adults, maybe more. All armed or with quick access to weapons. Defensive positions well chosen, sight lines clear. This wasn't a random collection of runaways. This was organized resistance. Silas should have turned back, reported to Thorne, let someone else's problem become someone else's problem. But Sarah's rock had split his forehead open, and Thomas's tackle had cracked 2 of his ribs, and his professional pride had been damaged worse than his body. He wanted them caught, dragged back, made examples of. He wanted it personal. So he circled the settlement, looking for weaknesses, finding none. Then he saw the children playing near the eastern edge, just 3 of them, watched over by a single teenage girl. Silas smiled his thin, cold smile. Hostages were excellent motivators. He waited until the girl's attention wandered, then moved with practiced silence, covering the distance in seconds. His hand clamped over the nearest child's mouth before a scream could form, and he dragged the boy backward into the trees, the other children too shocked to react immediately. By the time they started screaming, Silas was gone. The terrible bargain. Sarah was in the infirmary when the alarm went up, a bell ringing frantically, voices shouting, people running with weapons drawn. She stumbled outside to find chaos, parents searching desperately, men forming search parties, Ruth bellowing orders with parade ground authority. What happened? Someone took Samuel, Ruth said, her face carved from granite. Snatched him right from under our noses. Who? How? Professional work. Quiet, fast, clean. Which means. The tracker, Sarah finished, her stomach dropping. Silas. He followed us here. Ruth's eyes could have melted iron. You brought him to us. I didn't know. Ignorance is no defense when children's lives are at stake. Before Sarah could respond, a voice called from the tree line. Silas, staying hidden but close enough to be heard. I have the boy. Unharmed for now, but that changes if anyone tries anything stupid. Here's what's going to happen. You send out the 2 runaways, Sarah and Thomas, and I leave the boy at the tree line and disappear. You get your child back. I get my bounty. Everyone wins except the slaves, and honestly, who cares about them? The settlement erupted in angry shouts, but Ruth's raised hand silenced them. He's wounded, she called back. Can't even walk. You want him, you'll have to come get him yourself. Nice try, but I've been doing this too long. You patch him up enough to walk, and you send them both out, or I start removing the boy's fingers. You have 1 hour to decide. Silence fell over the settlement. Every eye turned to Sarah, some accusing, some sympathetic, all demanding an answer she didn't have. I'll go, Sarah said quietly. No, Ruth said. He's here because of me. That boy is in danger because. The boy is in danger because a paid killer decided to threaten children. That's not on you. That's on him and the system that pays him. Ruth's voice carried across the settlement. We don't negotiate with slavers. We don't submit to their logic. We find another way. What other way? You said yourself he's a professional. He won't be easy to track, won't be easy to fool. No, Ruth agreed. But he's still just a man. And men make mistakes. She turned to the assembled community. Awinata, how's Thomas? The Cherokee healer appeared in the infirmary doorway. Alive. Weak but stabilized. The fever's broken. Can he walk? With help. Ruth nodded, then began issuing orders with crisp efficiency. Jacob, Daniel, Solomon, spread out, find his position, but don't engage. Maria, organize the children into the central shelter. Elijah, gather every able-bodied fighter. We're going to give Mr. Crenshaw what he wants. Sarah stared at her. What? We're going to send you out, Ruth said. But not the way he expects. The counterstrike. 50 minutes later, Sarah and Thomas emerged from the settlement. Thomas leaned heavily on Sarah's shoulder, his face pale but determined. They walked slowly toward the tree line, making no attempt to run or resist. Silas watched from his hiding spot, satisfaction warming his chest. They'd caved, just like he knew they would. Nobody risked children when the alternative was just returning property to its rightful owner. He waited until Sarah and Thomas reached the midpoint between settlement and forest, then stepped out with Samuel held before him, one arm around the boy's chest, knife visible at his throat. That's far enough, Silas called. Boy goes free when I have them secured. Not before. Where's your honor? Sarah shouted. Where's the basic human decency? Left it in Georgia along with my patients. Get on your knees, both of you. Hands behind your heads. They obeyed, moving slowly. Silas pushed Samuel forward, and the boy ran back toward the settlement, sobbing but unhurt. Silas smiled, walking forward to claim his prize. That's when the settlement attacked. They came from 3 directions at once, fighters who'd circled wide during the negotiation, using the forest and terrain they knew intimately to flank Silas's position. The tracker realized his mistake instantly, spinning to run, but Jacob was already on him, then Daniel, then Solomon. Silas fought like a cornered wolf, viciously, desperately, drawing blood and breaking bones. But he was one man against a dozen, and his victims had become victors, and rage was a weapon sharper than any knife. When it ended, Silas Crenshaw lay bound and bloodied in the settlement center, surrounded by people he'd spent 20 years hunting. Ruth stood over him. We could kill you. Most here want to. Some have earned the right. Silas spat blood. Go ahead. Won't change anything. There's 100 more like me, and they'll keep coming. Maybe. But they'll come knowing what happened to you. Ruth gestured, and 2 men hauled Silas to his feet. We're taking you 3 days south, stripping you of everything, and leaving you with this message. Tell every tracker, every slave catcher, every hunter for hire you know, this settlement is protected. Anyone who comes for our people doesn't leave. Ever. You can't. We just did. They dragged Silas away, and Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe, to feel, to process what had just happened. They'd won. Not just survived, but actually won against the system designed to crush them. Thomas appeared beside her, still weak but smiling. Told you we'd make it. We got lucky. We got smart. There's a difference. Ruth joined them, her expression softer now. You're welcome to stay. We can always use people with your courage and determination. Or we can help you move further north, give you supplies and guidance. Your choice. Sarah looked at Thomas, then at the settlement, then at the vast forest stretching north toward true freedom. She thought about the children on the raft, about Marcus broken but alive, about Isaiah's betrayal and Silas's cruelty and Ruth's strength. I want to stay, she said finally. But not forever. I want to learn what you know, how to fight, how to lead, how to build something that lasts. And then I want to go back. Back? Ruth frowned. Back where? South. To the plantations. To bring more people out, to teach them what I've learned, to make sure others don't have to choose between slavery and death. Thomas stared at her. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only choice worth making. Sarah met Ruth's eyes. You said freedom that doesn't help the enslaved is just postponed slavery. I believed that when I said it. Now I want to live it. Ruth studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Then we'll teach you. Everything we know, everything we've learned. And when you're ready, we'll help you go back. And probably die, Thomas said. Probably, Sarah agreed. But free. The sun set over the settlement, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. In the distance, dogs bayed as Thorne's men searched in wrong directions, following false trails, finding nothing but frustration. And in the settlement, around fires and in quiet conversations, Sarah began learning what it meant not just to escape slavery but to fight it, not just to survive but to resist. The story wasn't over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. But that night, Sarah slept deeply and dreamlessly, and for the first time in her life, she slept free.